The line at the pharmacy hasn't moved in 4 minutes. Your phone is already in your hand, thumb hovering over an app you didn't consciously choose to open. Something inside you demanded relief from doing nothing, and it demanded it fast. You call this boredom. You treat it like a flaw, a symptom of a broken attention span, something to apologize for. But the real answer is far stranger than that. Boredom isn't a malfunction. It might be one of the oldest survival tools you own, still running quietly in the background of your brain, right now in a pharmacy line. Think about that phrase for a second. A survival tool, not exhaustion, not sadness, not simple restlessness with nowhere useful to go. A tool, built by evolution, sharpened across hundreds of thousands of years, still firing inside you today, usually at the worst possible moments, like waiting rooms, red lights, and slow-moving checkout lines. For most of the 20th century, psychology barely bothered with boredom. Fear got entire laboratories built around it. Anger got detailed theories, models, decades of research. Boredom got almost nothing. It was treated as a non-event, an empty pause between the emotions that actually mattered, worth studying mainly in prisoners, factory workers, and bored undergraduates filling out questionnaires for course credit. Fear has a spiking heart rate a machine can record. Anger has a clenched jaw and a raised voice. Boredom for decades didn't have an agreed-upon shape at all, and a feeling nobody can define is a hard feeling to fun. That changed with a psychologist named John Eastwood at York University in Toronto. He refused to accept the empty emotion story. Working alongside cognitive neuroscientist James Dankert, he spent years trying to pin down what boredom actually is, underneath the yawns and the sighs. Not nothing happening, something very specific happening. Eastwood and Dankert eventually defined boredom as the uncomfortable feeling of wanting to be engaged in something meaningful and being unable to find it or unable to sustain it. Your mind isn't quiet when you're bored. Your mind is straining, searching, coming up short over and over, and hating every second of it. Why would a straining, searching feeling be useful to keep around? Here's where the story turns strange. Picture an early human ancestor, tens of thousands of years ago, camped at the edge of familiar territory. The berries nearby are known. The water source is known. Every threat, every hiding place, every food source within walking distance has already been mapped by memory, walked, tested, exhausted. Staying exactly here is safe. Staying exactly here is also, eventually, a dead end. Resources run thin. Herds move on. Rivers shift course. A group that never felt the itch to explore beyond the known map would slowly, quietly run out of options, without ever understanding why. Boredom, seen this way, looks less like an emotional glitch and more like an internal alarm. Not an alarm for danger the way fear is, an alarm for stagnation. When your current environment stops offering anything new to learn, eat, build, or investigate, boredom fires, and it fires specifically to push you out of the rut before the rut quietly becomes a trap. Behavioral ecologists studying foraging animals describe something similar mathematically. A constant trade-off between exploiting a known, reliable resource and exploring for a potentially better one. Every forager, human or otherwise, is always running that calculation. Boredom may be the felt, emotional version of that calculation, tipping toward explore. There's a reason this idea maps so neatly onto the biggest story in human prehistory. Homo sapiens didn't stay put in the region where the species first evolved. Over tens of thousands of years, small groups kept pushing outward, across deserts, over land bridges, into unfamiliar coastlines and mountain ranges, long before there was any guarantee that what waited on the other side was better than what they already had. Some of that expansion was almost certainly forced by drought, by competition, by dwindling herds, but not all of it looks forced. Some of it looks like restlessness with nowhere obvious to aim itself except forward. You can see a rougher version of the same alarm in other species today. Zookeepers and animal welfare researchers have long documented something called stereotypic behavior in captive animals kept in understimulating enclosures. Pacing the same stretch of concrete for hours, swaying, repeating a motion with no function at all. Give the same animal a more complex, changing environment, Hidden food, new objects, unfamiliar scents, and the repetitive behavior drops sharply. Nobody assumes a pacing tiger is having a philosophical crisis about captivity. It's a nervous system starved of the novelty it evolved to expect, doing the only thing it can do with an alarm that has nowhere useful to send it. Your version of that pacing usually has a screen in it instead of concrete. That reframes almost everything about how the feeling actually works. Boredom doesn't beg you to relax, it begs you to move. It isn't the opposite of stress, calm, and harmless. It's closer to hunger, an internal signal specifically engineered to be unpleasant enough that you can't ignore it, so that you're motivated to go do something about it. Whether that something is genuine exploration, or in the modern world, something that only looks like exploration from a distance. Does any of that sound familiar? There's a second piece of the puzzle, and it comes from a very different kind of experiment. In 2014, psychologist Sandy Mann at the University of Central Lancashire ran a study built on a deliberately mundane task. She had one group of participants copy numbers out of a phone book for several minutes straight, about as boring an activity as a laboratory can ethically produce. Then she gave everyone the same creative challenge. Come up with as many uses as possible for 2 plastic cups. The group that had just endured the boring task didn't perform worse. They generated more ideas and more original ones than the group that skipped straight to the creative task. Boredom, it turned out, wasn't wasted time sitting in a waiting room of the mind. It was priming that mind to wander, search, and generate options it wouldn't otherwise have bothered generating. An idle brain isn't an empty workshop. It's a workshop the brain quietly switches on the moment nothing more urgent is competing for its attention, sketching out possibilities in the background, the way it might have once scanned the horizon for a better campsite, which raises an uncomfortable question about modern life. What happens when that ancient search and explore alarm never gets the chance to actually search or explore anything at all? Here's the twist almost nobody talks about. For nearly all of human history, boredom had exactly one exit ramp. Go find something. Walk somewhere new. Talk to somebody unfamiliar. Try a different angle on an old problem. Whittle something out of wood out of sheer restlessness. The discomfort and the solution were tightly linked, and the solution took real effort, which meant boredom, uncomfortable as it was, eventually resolved itself and sometimes resolved into something genuinely useful, a new trail, a new idea, a new tool. Today, that ancient alarm still fires exactly the same way it always has, but the exit ramp has completely changed shape. The instant the itch appears, a screen offers immediate, effortless novelty. A scroll, a notification, a stranger's video, engineered by people who understand this exact biological mechanism better than most psychologists do. You feel the same ancient signal your ancestors felt at the edge of known territory. But instead of being pushed toward real exploration, you're pushed toward the path of least resistance, a feed specifically optimized to interrupt the discomfort before it can finish asking its question. James Dankert has pointed to something important buried in this shift. Boredom itself was never really the danger. The danger is what a person reaches for to make it go away. Reach for a walk, a new skill, a hard conversation you've been avoiding, and boredom does exactly the job it evolved to do. Reach for the nearest infinite scroll instead, and the alarm gets muted but never actually answered, which means it just returns minutes later, asking the same unresolved question again, slightly louder each time. None of this is an accident. The apps competing for that reflex are built by teams who study attention and reward circuitry professionally, tuning notification timing, autoplay, and infinite scroll specifically to intercept the moment boredom starts to build, long before it reaches the intensity where you might actually get up and do something else instead. The goal was never to satisfy the itch. It was to keep it just barely scratched, forever, because a satisfied itch stops opening apps and an unresolved one keeps coming back. That loop has a cost that compounds quietly. Every time the itch gets silenced instead of followed, the brain learns that this particular discomfort has an easy, low-effort fix nearby. Over time, the willingness to sit with the feeling long enough to hear what it's actually asking for gets weaker, while the reflex to reach for the nearest distraction gets stronger. The environment has changed far faster than the ancient alarm system underneath it, and right now, That alarm is going off constantly in a world engineered specifically to answer it with the least useful possible response. Think about the last time you felt truly, deeply bored, not the mild understimulation of a slow afternoon, but genuinely stuck with nothing nearby to distract you. What did you actually want underneath the discomfort? Not distraction. Something to do that mattered. A project you'd been putting off. A conversation you'd been avoiding. A change you already half knew you needed to make. The ancient alarm was never asking you to numb out. It was asking you to act. The same way it once asked a small group of ancestors to leave a familiar, half-exhausted valley and go look for a better one. There's something almost humbling in that. The feeling you spent your whole life trying to escape as fast as possible might be the same feeling that once pushed small groups of humans across unmapped land, toward new water sources, toward better tools, toward each other. The discomfort was never the enemy. It was the nudge, quietly doing its job long before anyone had a word for it. So the next time that it shows up, in a waiting room, in a meeting that's gone quiet, in the 10 seconds before your thumb finds the nearest app, try pausing on it instead of immediately erasing it. Ask what it's actually pointing you toward, not what will make the feeling disappear fastest, but what it's been quietly asking you to go find, build, or try the entire time it's been sitting there, uncomfortable, patient, and older than almost anything else you feel. The line at the pharmacy still hasn't moved. Your phone is still in your hand, but this time, maybe you notice the itch before you silence it. And maybe, just for a second, you let it ask its real question instead of drowning it out with a scroll.